On March 11th, 2011, Japan's islands experienced a massive earthquake that lasted for 6 minutes, leaving entire towns in ruins. Little did anyone know that this earthquake was just the beginning of a much larger disaster. Following the powerful earthquake, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant faced an unprecedented catastrophe. Not only was the magnitude 9.1 earthquake a disaster, but also a tsunami struck the northeastern coast of Honshu Island around half an hour later, causing even more destruction than the earthquake itself. The tsunami flooded over 200 square miles of land, resulting in thousands of casualties and billions of dollars in damages. In Ōkuma town and Fukushima prefecture, the nuclear power plant was flooded by the tsunami, leading to a loss of power for the cooling system and the reactors. This lack of cooling caused the temperatures in the reactors to rise, eventually leading to explosions in 4 reactors. The release of radiation into the atmosphere from this incident made the Fukushima power plant disaster the second most infamous nuclear event in history. The 2011 Tōhoku earthquake remains the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan, with its epicenter located in the northwestern Pacific Ocean, 45 miles east of Ishika Peninsula on Honshu Island, the largest of Japan's 4 main islands. The earthquake had a widespread impact across the entire country, with the most intense tremors being felt in the prefectures of Miyagi, Fukushima, Ibaraki and Tochigi. The force was so strong that it shifted the island of Honshu 8 feet to the east and caused the Earth's axis to move by 10 inches, resulting in an increase in rotational speed by 1.8 milliseconds per day. Despite never experiencing such a powerful earthquake before, the Japanese people knew how to respond in such emergencies. Japan, being the country with the highest number of earthquakes globally, had prepared for such situations. It was a known fact that a strong earthquake would trigger a tsunami. Tsunamis are massive waves generated by undersea earthquakes, which transform into giant waves as they approach shallow waters near the coast. The March 11th earthquake was predicted to produce a tsunami reaching up to heights of 130 feet in certain areas. The initial and most severe earthquake struck at 2:46 p.m, lasting a full 6 minutes and causing extensive damage to infrastructure in the hardest hit regions. Following the tremors, a tsunami warning was promptly issued, giving coastal residents only a few minutes to evacuate to higher ground. Approximately 30 minutes later, a powerful tsunami struck the northeastern coast of Honshu Island, overwhelming even 18-foot high seawalls. Entire towns were submerged by the massive waves, leaving destruction in their wake. The tsunami caused far more destruction than the earthquake itself. In the 4 most affected prefectures, there were 4 nuclear power plants with a total of 11 reactors in operation at that time. TEPCO's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, along with the town of Ōkuma, had 6 reactors. Reactors 1, 2 and 3 were operational at the time of the earthquake. When the ground began to shake, these reactors automatically shut down, ceasing energy production. Despite the robust design of the reactors and the power plant, the earthquake damaged all 6 external power supply sources that supplied electricity to the pumps necessary for cooling the reactor cores. Even though the reactors were no longer functioning, the cores continued to heat up due to the decay heat from the radioactive nuclear fuel. Each reactor had a pump to circulate water through the cores for cooling, but when the external power supply was cut off, emergency diesel generators took over. Everything seemed under control until the tsunami struck at 3:42 p.m. The first wave, 45 feet high, hit the power plant on the coast, followed by another wave 8 minutes later. The 30-foot high seawalls were not enough to protect the plant, and water breached the facility. The flooding of the diesel generators in the turbine building basement led to a blackout, causing the reactor cooling system to fail. The situation at the plant caused significant alarm, prompting an immediate evacuation of the staff. Plant management notified the Fukushima prefectural authorities about the issue, leading to a declaration of a nuclear emergency at around 7:03 p.m. An evacuation order was then issued at around 8:50 p.m. for all individuals within a 2-kilometre radius of the plant. 30 minutes later, upon receiving news of the situation in Tokyo, the radius was expanded to 3 kilometres. Despite efforts by the remaining staff to inject water into the system through an emergency core cooling system, the standard pumps were inoperable and the diesel generators were flooded. Unfortunately, attempts to connect the plant to an external power source were unsuccessful. Consequently, the temperature of the fuel rods inside the reactor pressure vessel began to rise, resulting in increased steam pressure. To alleviate the pressure, it was vented to the suppression pond wet well specifically designed for this purpose. However, this led to a decrease in water level inside the vessel containing the fuel rods. 3 hours after the earthquake, the water level in reactor 1 fell below the top of the fuel rods. Within just 1.5 hours, the water level had dropped to the bottom of the fuel rods. As the temperature of the fuel rods rose to 2800 degrees Celsius, they began to melt. The exposed fuel rod's hot zirconium cladding came into contact with steam, generating a large amount of hydrogen. While the presence of hydrogen itself was not the issue, its combination with oxygen, whether pure or in the air, posed a highly explosive risk. During attempts to release pressure inside the reactor pressure vessel, hydrogen was inadvertently released into the service floor at the top of the reactor building. On March 12th at 3:56 p.m, a massive hydrogen explosion occurred due to the ignition of hydrogen and air mixture, resulting in the roof of the reactor building being blown off. Reactors 2 and 3 experienced a similar situation, albeit with a slight delay. The backup water injection system in these units, powered by batteries, operated for a longer duration. However, the system failed in Reactor 3 on March 12th and in Reactor 2 on March 14th. Subsequently, at 11 a.m. on March 14th, a hydrogen explosion caused damage to the roof and top part of the building of Reactor number 3. As a result of a shared piping system, some hydrogen leaked into Reactor number 4, leading to a similar explosion on the morning of March 15th. Notably, there was no explosion on the service floor of Reactor 2. In an effort to prevent explosions like those in Reactors 1 and 3, the staff opened a blowout panel on top of the building to release the hydrogen. While successful in preventing an explosion, this action resulted in increased emission of radioactive gases outside the reactor building. The venting process was not the sole cause of radioactive pollution, as most of the radioactivity was estimated to have been released from Reactor 2, where a meltdown of the nuclear fuel and an explosion of the primary containment dry well led to a rupture in the reactor walls, allowing contaminated water to escape. Fission products such as iodine-131, cesium-137 and cesium-134 were released into the air and sea. Iodine-131, a volatile radioisotope with a short half-life of only 8 days, contrasts with cesium-137, which has a half-life of over 30 years and can lead to severe illness and death with high exposure. Authorities, aware of the risks posed by the nuclear fuel meltdown, ordered the evacuation of individuals within a 12-mile radius of the plant. Radioactive releases quickly spread, with increased radiation detected at measuring stations across the northern hemisphere on March 12th, the day of the first explosion. Fortunately, the level of radioactivity was found to be below the threshold that could seriously endanger lives and health. The emission of radioactivity was 10 times lower than that of Chernobyl, the worst nuclear disaster in history. The release of contaminated water into the ocean was a contentious issue. Plant staff, with government approval, released 10,400 cubic metres of contaminated water into the sea in early April. Additionally, an unknown quantity of contaminated water from Reactor 2 had seeped into the ground. Unlike Chernobyl, the Fukushima nuclear incident did not result in direct casualties. However, 154,000 individuals were evacuated from the plant's vicinity, causing significant distress as they had to abandon their homes and belongings. Most of the over 2,000 disaster-related deaths were attributed to stress from the evacuation and living in shelters rather than radioactivity exposure. Life was permanently altered for those residing within the 143 square mile red zone, which remains partially closed even today. The events that occurred in March 2011 were catastrophic on a massive scale. The natural forces at play were unyielding and seemed insurmountable, leading to the unfortunate events at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. While it appeared to be a tragic consequence of an unavoidable natural disaster, the reality was starkly different. An independent investigation commission established by the National Parliament found that the Tokyo Electric Power Company had neglected safety protocols for natural disasters and disregarded tsunami risk assessments based on the most recent studies. TEPCO's management failed to address several critical issues that could have averted the disaster, from insufficient sea barriers and inadequate cooling systems to unclear emergency protocols for employees. 12 days following the earthquake, the Fukushima nuclear power plant's reactors were linked to external power sources and the cooling of reactors 1 to 3 was reinstated. Construction of covers over the reactors to prevent further release of radioactive particles began on August 10th. Simultaneously, cleanup crews had already cleared a significant amount of radioactive debris from the site. 9 months later, 3 damaged reactors were successfully placed in a stable state of cold shutdown. The Fukushima power plant catastrophe resulted in a substantial alteration to Japan's energy policy. Confidence in the safety of nuclear power was severely undermined. Despite the government's initial plans to expand the use of nuclear power plants and overall power generation, they were compelled to decrease the country's dependence on nuclear energy. Following the Fukushima disaster, nearly all nuclear reactors in the nation, with the exception of 2, were temporarily shut down. The government mandated reassessments of nuclear risks and safety and established a new nuclear regulatory agency under the Environment Ministry to oversee the operation of nuclear power plants. The Fukushima nuclear disaster served as a stark reminder to Japan and the global community that the immense power of nuclear energy should never be underestimated.